I used to think I was the problem in my family until I saw my 8-year-old daughter on her knees cleaning up her own birthday cake while adults stepped over her like she didn't exist. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't about me anymore. My name is Leora Bennett. I am 34, and that was the last day I let them treat my child the way they treated me. Chapter 1: The Day I Stopped Ignoring It. My name is Leora Bennett. I am 34 years old, and the day I stopped ignoring my family did not start with a fight. It started with a cake. I woke up early that morning before Emma did, sometime around 6, when the house was still quiet and the light coming through the kitchen window felt soft instead of sharp. I stood there for a moment with my hands resting on the counter, just listening, letting myself believe this day was going to be simple. Emma was turning 8. I had taken the day off work, something I almost never did. There were emails waiting, deadlines stacked, a product launch that was already behind schedule. But none of that mattered. Not that day. I had promised myself that her birthdays would be different from mine. Smaller, maybe, quieter, but hers, entirely hers. I pulled the cake out of the fridge, a simple vanilla cake with strawberry filling that I had stayed up late frosting the night before. It wasn't perfect. The edges were uneven, the lettering slightly crooked. Happy Birthday Emma leaned a little too far to the right, like it couldn't quite stand on its own. But it was real. It was made for her. When Emma came down the stairs, still in her pajamas, her hair messy, her eyes half closed, she stopped at the bottom and just stared at it. "Is that for me?" I smiled and nodded. "Only for you." She walked over slowly, like she didn't want to break the moment, like if she moved too fast, it might disappear. Then she reached out and touched the edge of the table, not even the cake itself, just the table, like she was grounding herself in it. "It's perfect." I don't think she was talking about the cake. Her friend Zoe arrived around noon, carrying a small gift bag and that kind of nervous energy kids have when they're not sure how they're supposed to act in someone else's house. The two of them sat on the living room floor, whispering, giggling, building something out of mismatched toys and imagination. It was quiet. It was small. It was exactly what I had wanted. For a few hours, it felt like we had carved out a space that belonged only to us. No interruptions, no expectations, no comparisons. I remember standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching them through the doorway. Emma's laugh was soft, not the kind that filled a room, but the kind that stayed close, like it didn't want to draw too much attention. I had heard that laugh my whole life, even when it wasn't hers yet. When I was 10, my birthday cake had two names on it. I didn't understand it at the time. I just remember standing there while everyone sang, hearing Ethan's name come out of their mouths right after mine, like we were sharing something that was supposed to belong to me. No one asked me if that was okay. No one asked me what I wanted. Later that night, I told myself it didn't matter, that it was just a cake, that I was being dramatic, that I should be grateful. I got very good at telling myself things like that. Standing in my kitchen all those years later, watching Emma, I realized I had made a quiet promise back then without even knowing it. I told myself I wouldn't let my child feel that way. Around 3 in the afternoon, the front door opened. I didn't hear a knock. I didn't hear anyone ask if it was a good time. The door just opened, like it always had, like it belonged to them. My mother's voice came first, bright and loud and already filling the house before she even stepped fully inside. "We're here." I turned before I saw them. Diane walked in carrying a tray of food, something store-bought that she probably picked up on the way, like that made it thoughtful. My father followed behind holding a box of drinks, and Ethan came in last, talking to someone over his shoulder. Two people I didn't recognize stepped in behind him, then another, and another. "What is this?" The words came out of my mouth before I could soften them. My mother smiled like I had just asked a harmless question. "We thought we'd make it a real celebration." Ethan stepped forward, his energy already filling the space, already shifting it. "It's kind of a big deal," he said, like I didn't know, like I hadn't heard about Harvard every single day for the past 3 weeks. "Deferred MBA, fall 2024. They don't just hand those out." I looked at him, then at the people behind him, then at the tray in my mother's hands. This is Emma's birthday. My father set the drinks down on the table like that answered everything. And this is important too. The house changed in minutes. Music started playing from someone's phone, shoes tracked in dirt across the floor I'd just cleaned, voices layered over each other, louder and louder, until there was no space left for anything quiet. Zoe moved closer to Emma, the two of them sitting side by side now instead of facing each other. Emma's hands folded in her lap, her shoulders slightly pulled in, like she was trying to take up less space. I watched her as one of Ethan's friends walked past them without even noticing, stepping around their toys like they were obstacles instead of people. Another guest walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge without asking. Someone laughed too loudly at something that wasn't that funny. And then, somewhere in the middle of it all, I heard a voice say, "Whose party is this again?" I turned. A woman I didn't know was standing near the doorway, holding a drink, looking around like she was trying to make sense of the decorations that didn't match the crowd. She glanced at Emma. Emma looked down at her hands. No one answered. My mother was busy talking to someone about Ethan's future. My father was explaining something about networking. Ethan was already in the center of a conversation that had nothing to do with anything happening in that room a few hours ago. I took a step forward, like I was going to say something, like I was going to fix it. But I didn't, because I had spent my whole life stepping forward and then stopping myself. It's not worth it. It's just a moment. Don't make it bigger than it is. Those thoughts came automatically, like they always did. And then the cake slipped. I didn't see how it happened. I just heard the soft sound of something hitting the floor, followed by a small intake of breath. I turned again. The edge of the cake had fallen onto the hardwood, a smear of frosting spreading out across the surface. One of the guests had bumped into the table without noticing. Emma was already on her knees. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. She just reached for a napkin and started wiping the frosting away. Slow, careful movements, like she was trying to erase it before anyone could get upset. Someone stepped around her. Another person walked past, their shoe missing the edge of the mess by an inch. No one said stop. No one said it's okay. No one said this is her birthday. I felt something in my chest shift. Not break, not explode, just move into place. Like something that had been loose for a long time had finally settled. I watched her for a second longer than I should have. Then I looked up. The room was full of noise, full of movement, full of people who didn't see what was right in front of them. My mother laughed at something across the room. Ethan was mid-story, his hands moving as he talked, everyone around him leaning in. My father nodded along like this was exactly how things were supposed to be. And I realized something that felt so obvious it almost made me dizzy. This wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a bad moment in an otherwise good day. This was the pattern, the same one I had grown up in, the same one I had explained away, minimized, swallowed over and over again. The only difference now was that it wasn't happening to me. I didn't move right away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call anyone out. I just stood there watching, letting the reality of it settle into something solid and undeniable. For the first time in a long time, I didn't look for a way to make it smaller. I didn't look for a way to excuse it. I didn't tell myself it didn't matter, because it did. It always had. I just finally stopped pretending it didn't. I looked around the house at the walls I had painted, the furniture I had paid for, the space I had built piece by piece over the last 7 years, and something else clicked into place. I wasn't standing in their home. I never had been. I'd just been living like I was. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. It took me a long time to understand that there are some things you can never earn, no matter how hard you try. When I was 16, Ethan got his first car. It wasn't anything extraordinary by most standards, just a used Honda with a few scratches and a smell that never quite went away, but in our house, it was treated like a milestone. My parents stood in the driveway like they were unveiling something much bigger, something that proved all their effort had paid off. My mother took pictures. My father handed him the keys with both hands like it meant something ceremonial. I stood on the porch, watching. A week before that, I had brought home my report card. Straight A's, top of my class, the kind of thing teachers wrote notes about in the margins. I had left it on the kitchen counter where I knew they would see it. My mother glanced at it while she was making coffee. My father nodded once. Good job. That was it. I remember telling myself it made sense, that a car was bigger, that it was more practical, that grades were just expected. I told myself I wasn't being fair, that I shouldn't compare. I got very good at explaining things in a way that made them easier to accept. I carried that into everything. College applications, jobs, relationships. If something felt off, I adjusted. If something hurt, I minimized it. If something was missing, I convinced myself it wasn't necessary. Because the alternative was admitting that I had been trying to earn something that was never being offered in the first place. The music in the living room pulled me back. Someone had connected a speaker, something louder now, something that filled every corner of the house, the kind of music that made it impossible to think without raising your voice. I stepped into the room again, and it felt even smaller than it had before, like the walls had moved in while I wasn't looking. Ethan stood near the center, a drink in his hand, talking to a group of people who seemed genuinely interested in what he had to say. He had always been good at that, filling space, holding attention, making everything orbit around him without ever asking for it directly. My mother hovered close by, adding details to his story, repeating things he had already said but making them sound more impressive the second time. My father laughed at the right moments, nodding like he was part of it, like this was something he had built. Emma was still on the floor. She had finished cleaning the frosting, but she hadn't moved far from the spot. Zoe sat next to her, whispering something I couldn't hear, but Emma's shoulders stayed pulled in, her hands resting in her lap like she didn't know where to put them. I walked toward them, but before I reached them, a voice cut through the room. Someone started singing. Happy birthday to you. The sound spread quickly, people picking it up without thinking, without asking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan laughed, surprised but pleased, raising his hand slightly like he was trying to wave it off but not really trying at all. My mother clapped along, her voice loud, confident. Happy birthday, dear Ethan. The name landed wrong in the room, but no one reacted, no one stopped, no one corrected it. I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, not yet, but from something quieter, something heavier. I looked at Emma. She wasn't looking at them, she was looking at the floor. Zoe stopped singing halfway through, her voice trailing off like she realized something didn't match. She looked at Emma, then at me, then back at Emma again, unsure. The song finished anyway. There was a small round of applause. Someone handed Ethan another drink. Someone else asked him about Boston, about Harvard, about what came next. The moment passed as easily as it had started, like it had always been meant for him. I crouched down next to Emma. Hey. She didn't look up right away. You okay? She nodded, but it was too quick, too automatic. I smoothed the piece of hair behind her ear, my fingers lingering there for a second longer than necessary. We can cut your cake in a bit, okay? Another nod. Her voice came out small. Okay. I stood up slowly, and that's when I noticed Tanya. She was standing near the edge of the room, not fully inside the circle of conversation, not fully outside of it either. Her posture was different from everyone else's. Still, observing. She had one of those expressions that teachers have when they're trying to understand something without making it obvious that they're doing it. Her eyes moved from Ethan to my parents, then to Emma, then finally to me. She stepped closer, just enough to lower her voice. Is this her party? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know how to answer that question without making everything in the room sound as wrong as it actually was.
Tanya didn't press. She just nodded once, like she had already understood. She walked over to Emma and crouched down, bringing herself to eye level. "Hey, Emma." Emma looked up this time, but only slightly. "You having fun?" Another small nod. Tanya's voice softened. "What are you most excited about today?" Emma hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the table where the cake sat, slightly shifted now, the frosting imperfect in a way that it hadn't been an hour ago. Then she looked back down. "I don't know." Tanya stayed there for a moment longer, then stood up, her expression neutral but her eyes not. When she passed me again, she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. There was something strange about being seen like that. Not judged, not questioned, just seen. It made everything harder to ignore. I turned back toward the center of the room. Ethan was laughing now, louder than before, his words coming faster as he explained something about business school, about opportunities, about how things were going to change. "It's not even a real party," he said at one point, gesturing vaguely toward the decorations, toward the table, toward Emma without actually looking at her. She only had one friend over. A few people chuckled. My mother didn't hesitate. "Birthdays happen every year," she said, her tone light but certain. "Harvard happens once." My father nodded like that settled it. Of course it did. Of course that made sense to them. Another voice joined in, someone I didn't recognize, someone who had only been in my house for less than an hour. "She'll get over it." It was said casually, almost kindly, like reassurance, like Emma was something small, something temporary, something that didn't need to be taken seriously. I felt something shift again, not sharp, not sudden, just a quiet alignment, like pieces that had been scattered for years were finally falling into place in a way I couldn't rearrange anymore. I looked at Emma, really looked at her, at the way she sat, still and careful, like she was trying to not be in the way, at the way she answered questions quickly, automatically, like she had learned that the right answer was the one that ended the conversation, at the way she didn't ask for anything, didn't reach for anything, didn't expect anything. I had seen that before. I had been that before. And for a second, the room blurred, not completely, just enough that the edges softened, and the past and present sat on top of each other in a way that was impossible to separate. I wasn't remembering anymore. I was recognizing. This wasn't a single moment. It wasn't a bad day. It wasn't something that could be fixed with an apology or a better plan next year. It was a pattern, one that had been there long before Emma, one that I had carried without realizing it, one that I had allowed to continue because it was easier to stop it. I straightened up slowly. The noise in the room continued, none of it unchanged. Ethan kept talking, my parents kept listening, the guests kept moving around like everything was exactly as it should be. Nothing on the outside had shifted, but something on the inside had. And this time, I didn't reach for an explanation. I didn't look for a way to make it smaller. I didn't tell myself it was that bad. Because it was. It always had been. I just finally stopped accepting it. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3. The House They Never Noticed. Nothing in the room changed after that, but everything felt different. The music kept playing, people kept talking, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Emma and Zoe disappeared quietly up the stairs without anyone noticing. I watched them go. No one else did. By the time the last guests left, it was close to 10. The house looked like something that had been used too much in too short a time. Plates stacked unevenly on the counter, cups half full on every surface, crumbs pressed into the floor like they belonged there now. My mother moved through the kitchen like none of it bothered her, picking things up slowly, not really cleaning, just rearranging. "We should do this more often," she said, almost to herself. My father nodded from the dining table, flipping through something on his phone. Ethan leaned against the counter, scrolling,
already detached from everything that had just happened. I stood near the doorway for a moment, taking it in. Then I walked past them and up the stairs. Emma was sitting on her bed, still in her dress. Zoe was gone. I hadn't even heard her leave. Emma looked up when I walked in. Did she go home? I nodded. Her mom picked her up a while ago. Emma nodded back like that was expected. I sat next to her, careful not to crowd her. Do you want to change? Another small nod. She stood up, walked to her dresser, and pulled out a t-shirt and leggings. She moved slowly, not dragging, just quiet, like everything inside her has shifted into a lower volume. I turned slightly, giving her space. After a moment, she said it without looking at me. It wasn't really my party. I felt it land somewhere deeper than anything that had been said downstairs. I know. She changed, folded her dress neatly and placed it on the chair. Can we just do something next time? Just us? I nodded. Yeah, just us. She climbed back onto the bed and pulled the blanket over her legs. Okay. That was it. No tears, no questions, just acceptance. I sat there for a few seconds longer than I needed to, then stood up. Get some sleep, okay? Okay. I turned off the light and closed the door halfway. Downstairs, nothing had settled. My mother was still moving things around. My father had moved to the living room. Ethan was laughing at something on his phone. No one looked up when I came back down. I didn't say anything. Not that night. The next morning, the house was quieter, but not calm. It felt like something had been left unresolved, like everyone was waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and sat at the kitchen table. Emails, messages, deadlines. My calendar was full. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Hello? Leora, hi, this is Tanya, Emma's teacher. I straightened slightly. Hi, is everything okay? There was a small pause. I just wanted to check in about Emma. I waited. She didn't really talk today. Not during class, not during recess. She stayed by herself most of the time. I closed my eyes for a second. That's not like her. No, it's not. Another pause. I asked her if she was okay. She said she was, but she didn't make eye contact. I pressed my fingers lightly against the edge of the table. Thank you for telling me. Of course, I just thought you should know. I appreciate it. We hung up. I stared at the screen in front of me, but I wasn't reading anything. A notification popped up. A meeting in 5 minutes. I joined the call. Faces filled the screen. Voices overlapped. Someone asked a question about timelines, about deliverables, about whether we could push the release by 2 weeks. I answered. Clear, direct, calm. At the same time, I opened my email and started typing a response to Tanya. Thank you for letting me know. I'll talk to her tonight. My fingers moved automatically, my voice steady in the meeting. 2 worlds running side by side. One where everything was controlled, one where nothing was. After the meeting ended, I closed my laptop halfway and reached for my phone again. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name. Marissa Cole. We hadn't talked in a while, not since college, not since everything had pulled us in different directions, but she was still there, a quiet constant I had never removed. I hesitated for a second. Then I called. She picked up on the second ring. Leora? Hey, I know it's been a while. It's okay. What's going on? I leaned back in the chair, looking at the ceiling. I need to ask you something, hypothetically. She laughed softly. It's never hypothetical. Go ahead. I took a breath. If someone owns a house, like fully owns it, mortgage, everything in their name, and other people have been living there for a few years, do they have any rights to stay? There was no hesitation in her answer. Not ownership rights, not unless there's something in writing, lease, agreement, anything like that. There isn't. Then they're considered occupants. Depending on the situation, you'd still have to give notice to remove them. You can't just change the locks. How long? In Texas, typically 30 days, written notice. 30 days. The number sat there, simple and solid. And if they don't leave? You can file for eviction. It goes through the court. It's not immediate, but it's enforceable. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Okay. She paused. Leora, what's going on? I looked out the window. Nothing yet. Another pause, longer this time. Call me if it becomes something. I will. We hung up. I set the phone down slowly. 30 days. It didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a process, something structured, something real, something I could actually do. I opened my laptop again, this time not for work. I pulled up my bank account. Payment history, month after month. Mortgage, utilities, repairs. I scrolled back. That was when I signed the papers. I remembered the day clearly. Sitting in a small office, pen in hand, listening to someone explain interest rates and terms while I nodded like I understood everything. I didn't, not completely, but I knew enough. I knew I was doing it alone. 2 years later, my parents moved in. Temporary, they said, just until things settled. They never left. And somewhere along the way, the story changed. It became their house, their space, their authority. I let it. Because it was easier, because pushing back felt like breaking something I wasn't ready to break. Voices pulled me out of it. My parents had come into the kitchen. My father leaned against the counter, arms crossed. My mother stood beside him. "This is our home," he said, like he was continuing a conversation we hadn't actually started. "We built this family," my mother added, her tone softer but no less certain. I looked at them, really looked at them. At the confidence in their posture, at the assumption in their voices. I didn't respond. Not yet. Ethan walked in a few seconds later, glancing between us. "What's going on?" No one answered. He looked at me, then at them, then back at me again. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not quite amused, not quite serious. "You wouldn't actually do anything about it." It landed somewhere between a joke and a challenge. I met his eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just looked at him. And then I walked away. The silence stretched longer than it should have. No one filled it. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to. They thought they owned this house. They never noticed who was paying for it.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The line I finally drew. The silence didn't break right away. It stretched. It sat in the room between all of us, heavy and unfamiliar, like something no one quite knew how to move around. My father shifted first, pushing himself off the counter, his posture tightening like he was preparing for something he didn't fully understand yet. What exactly is that supposed to mean? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wasn't ready to say it yet. My mother stepped forward instead, her tone sharper now. "If you have something to say, Leora, then say it. Don't stand there acting like this." Acting like this. I almost smiled at that. Ethan let out a short breath, like he was already tired of the tension. "Can we not do this right now?" He glanced at his phone, then back at me, like this was an inconvenience, something that needed to be handled quickly so everything could go back to normal. I finally moved, just a step, enough to place myself fully in front of them. "I am saying something." My voice came out steady, not loud, not shaking, just clear. That seemed to bother them more than anything. My mother crossed her arms. "You're overreacting." There it was, the word that had followed me my entire life. I let it sit there for a second. My father added, almost casually, "It was just cake." Just cake. The same phrase, dressed differently. Ethan shook his head slightly, like he was trying to make sense of something that didn't deserve this level of attention. "You're making this into something it's not." Then, after a brief pause, he added what they had all been thinking. "You're jealous of Ethan." It was almost predictable. I felt the words land, not as an attack, but as confirmation. They hadn't changed. They weren't going to. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan's expression shifted, something flickering underneath the surface, something less polished, less controlled. "If I don't make it," he said,
his voice lower now, more real than anything he had said all night. Everything they did means nothing. The room went still again. That was the first honest thing I had heard from him in a long time. It explained more than he probably intended. All of it. The pressure, the favoritism, the way everything in this house had been arranged around him like he was the center of something fragile. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared. He straightened, his tone shifting back, dismissive again. She'll be fine. Kids forget. That was it. That was the line. Not the cake, not the party, not even the years before it. That. The assumption that Emma's feelings were temporary, replaceable, forgettable. Something inside me didn't snap. It settled. I took a breath. You have 30 days. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed exactly where they were supposed to. No one reacted immediately. It took a second for the meaning to catch up. My mother blinked first. What? My father frowned, like he had misheard me. What did you just say? I didn't raise my voice. You have 30 days to move out. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't confusion, it was resistance. My mother let out a short laugh, the kind people use when they think something is too absurd to take seriously. You're not serious. I didn't answer. My father stepped forward, his tone hardening. This is our home. The same sentence, the same certainty. I met his eyes. No, it's not. That was the first time I had said it out loud. It didn't feel dramatic, it felt correct. My mother's expression shifted, the confidence cracking just slightly. We built this family. I held her gaze. You had years to be a family. The words came slowly, not rushed, not forced. I'm done waiting. Ethan pushed himself off the counter, frustration finally breaking through. You can't just kick us out. That's not how this works. It is, I said. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. You're being ridiculous. You wouldn't actually do this. I didn't respond to him. I didn't need to. My father tried a different approach, his voice lowering, softer now, like he was reaching for something familiar. We're family. That word. It used to mean something. I felt it there for a second. The old reflex, the instinct to soften, to step back, to make space. But it didn't hold. Then act like it. The room went still again. This time, no one spoke. Not my mother, not my father, not Ethan. There was nothing left to argue with. Because this wasn't an argument. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't something that could be negotiated or reframed or explained away. It was a decision. A small sound came from the hallway. We all turned at the same time. Emma stood there, her hand resting lightly against the wall, her eyes moving between all of us. What's going on? Her voice was soft, careful. I felt my body shift before I even thought about it. I stepped toward her, my tone changing instantly. Hey, it's okay. I kneeled down slightly so I was closer to her level. We're just talking. She looked past me, toward the kitchen, toward my parents, toward Ethan. It didn't take much for her to understand that it wasn't just talking. Did I do something wrong? The question was quiet, automatic, familiar. No, I said immediately. I reached out, brushing her hair back from her face. You didn't do anything wrong. She held my gaze for a second longer, searching for something. Then she nodded. Okay. I stood up, keeping my body slightly between her and the rest of the room. Why don't you go back upstairs for a bit? She hesitated, then nodded again. Okay. She turned and walked back down the hallway, her steps light, careful. I waited until she was out of sight. Then I turned back. The contrast was immediate. My voice, my posture, everything shifted back into place. My mother was staring at me now, really staring, like she was seeing something she hadn't seen before. This isn't you, she said. I didn't react. My father shook his head slowly. You're making a mistake. Ethan let out a breath, frustration and disbelief mixing together. You're actually serious? I met his eyes. Yes. Another silence, longer this time. He looked away first. No one raised their voice, no one moved, but something had already changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was final. And for the first time, they could feel it. My mother's expression shifted again, the certainty gone now, replaced with something sharper, something closer to realization. This wasn't anger. This wasn't something that would pass overnight. This wasn't something they could wait out. This was happening, and there was nothing in that room they could use to stop it. Not guilt, not habit, not history, nothing. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was trying to find the version of me she was used to, the one who explained, the one who adjusted, the one who let things go. She didn't find her, and that's when I saw it, the exact moment she understood. I wasn't asking anymore.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. What happens when you stop asking? The house didn't explode after that. It tightened. Everything became quieter, but not calmer. Doors closed more carefully. Footsteps softened, like everyone was trying not to disturb something that had already been broken. No one brought it up again that night. My parents stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, speaking in low voices that didn't quite reach me. Ethan disappeared into the guest room with his phone, the door shutting harder than necessary. I went upstairs. Emma was already in bed, her light still on, a workbook open in front of her that she wasn't really reading. I leaned against the door frame for a second, watching her. "You still awake?" She nodded. "Yeah." I walked in and sat at the edge of the bed. "How was school today?" She shrugged. "Okay." It wasn't okay. I could hear it in the way she said it, flat, automatic. "You sure?" Another shrug. "Yeah." I didn't push. I had spent my entire childhood being asked questions I didn't know how to answer without making things worse. I wasn't going to do that to her. "All right," I said softly. "Finish up, then get some sleep." She nodded again. "Okay." I stood up, turned off the light, and closed the door halfway, just like the night before. Downstairs, nothing had resolved. It lingered. The next morning, I printed the notice. It wasn't complicated, just a single page, clear, direct. 30 days, no emotion, no explanation. I placed it on the kitchen counter before anyone else came down. Then I left for work. The drive felt longer than usual, even though it wasn't. At every red light, my mind ran through the same question in different forms. Was I doing the right thing? And every time, the answer came back the same. It didn't matter, because I wasn't doing it for me. At the office, everything moved like it always did. Meetings, emails, updates, deadlines. No one there knew what was happening at my house. No one saw the shift. I sat in a conference room with a group of people discussing timelines for a feature release, nodding at the right moments, asking the right questions, writing things down that I knew I would remember anyway. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. Mom. I let it ring. It buzzed again. Dad. Then again, Ethan. I turned it face down on the table. "Everything okay?" asked Noah from across the table. He had been watching me for a second longer than the others. "Yeah," I said, "just family stuff." He nodded, not pushing, but not dismissing it either. That's usually the complicated kind. I gave a small, tired smile. "Yeah." After the meeting, I stepped outside. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails. I didn't listen to them. Not yet. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. "What is this?" My mother's voice came through immediately, sharp, controlled but barely. "The notice." "You're serious?" "Yes." A pause. Then louder, "You can't do this." "I can. This is our home." The same words, the same certainty, but it didn't land the same way anymore. "You have 30 days. You're making a mistake." I didn't respond. Her voice shifted, trying something else. "What are people going to say?" There it was. Not about Emma, not about what happened, about perception. "I don't care." The silence on the other end was brief, then replaced with something colder. "You will." She hung up. I stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand.
the air outside feeling sharper than it had a few minutes ago. When I went back inside, my inbox was full. Work didn't stop. It never did. Later that afternoon, I got another call, a known number again. I answered. "Hi, this is Mrs. Ellison, Emma's class." I straightened slightly. "Hi. I just wanted to check something. The kids were talking about the party yesterday." I didn't say anything. And Emma said something that sounded a little confusing. I waited. She said it wasn't her party. The words landed quietly. "Yeah," I said, "it wasn't." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, I'll talk to her," I added. "Of course," she said quickly. "I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Thank you." We hung up. I stayed at my desk for a while after that, staring at the screen without really seeing anything. By the time I got home, the house felt different again. Not louder, not quieter, just unsettled. The notice was gone from the counter. My parents were in the living room, sitting farther apart than usual. Ethan stood near the window, his back to the room. No one greeted me. I set my bag down. "We need to talk," my father said. I nodded once. We already did. My mother's voice cut in. "This isn't how family handles things." I met her gaze. "No, this is how I handle things." Ethan turned, frustration now visible, no longer hidden behind sarcasm. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." I didn't respond. He stepped closer. "You're going to throw us out over a birthday party?" "It wasn't about the party." "Then what is it about?" I held his gaze. "You already know." He looked away first. That seemed to irritate him more. "This is insane." Maybe it was, but it was also the first thing that had made sense in a long time. Dinner that night was silent. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, the kind that presses against you, that makes every small movement louder than it should be. Forks against plates, chairs shifting, breathing. No one tried to fill it. No one told stories. No one asked questions. For the first time, there was no center, no one being prioritized, no one being ignored. Just space, uncomfortable, unfamiliar space. After dinner, I cleared the table. No one offered to help. No one had before either. That hadn't changed, but something else had. I didn't wait, I didn't hesitate. I just did what needed to be done. Upstairs, Emma sat at her desk working on her homework. I leaned against the doorframe again, like I had the night before. "You doing okay?" She nodded, eyes still on the page. "Yeah." I stepped closer. "What are you working on?" "Math." "Need help?" She shrugged. "I got it." I watched her for a moment. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't hesitating. She was just doing it, quietly, on her own. I felt something settle again, the same way it had before. For the first time, their silence didn't scare me. It didn't mean I had done something wrong. It just meant they didn't know what to do anymore. And that wasn't my responsibility. I stayed there a little longer, then nodded. "All right, I'll be downstairs if you need me." "Okay." I turned and walked back down the hallway. The house was still. Not empty, not peaceful, but no longer controlled by the same rules. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something to be afraid of. It felt like something I could finally live with.
Chapter 6. The Quiet Kind of Justice. The days after that didn't rush forward. They unfolded slowly, like everything had to catch up to a decision that had already been made. No one brought it up again in the same way. There were no more arguments, no more raised voices, no attempts to convince me I was wrong. That part had passed. What remained was something quieter, something heavier. They started packing. Not all at once, not dramatically. It began with small things disappearing. A stack of my father's papers from the corner of the dining table, a few of my mother's dishes from the cabinet, Ethan's shoes no longer by the door. Each change was subtle, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention.
I was paying attention. I didn't comment on it. I didn't offer help. I didn't ask where they were going. It wasn't my role anymore. One afternoon, I came home to find boxes lined up along the hallway. Not many, just enough to make it clear that this was real, that it was moving forward whether anyone liked it or not. My mother stood near the kitchen holding a dish towel she wasn't using. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way she carried herself. "We didn't think you'd actually go through with it," she said. I set my keys down. "I told you I would." She nodded slowly, like she was still trying to understand something that no longer needed explaining. My father stayed in the living room, watching television without really watching it. The volume was low. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Ethan was in the hallway, on his phone. "I'm telling you, it's just temporary. I just need a place for a few weeks." He stopped when he saw me. There was a brief moment where neither of us spoke. Then he ended the call. He looked at me, frustration still there, but something else mixed in now. Uncertainty. Where are we supposed to go? The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't sarcastic. It was real. I held his gaze. Chapter 6. The quiet kind of justice. The days after that didn't rush forward. They unfolded slowly, like everything had to catch up to a decision that had already been made. No one brought it up again in the same way. There were no more arguments, no more raised voices, no attempts to convince me I was wrong. That part had passed. What remained was something quieter, something heavier. They started packing. Not all at once, not dramatically. It began with small things disappearing. A stack of my father's papers from the corner of the dining table, a few of my mother's dishes from the cabinet, Ethan's shoes no longer by the door. Each change was subtle, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention. I was paying attention. I didn't comment on it. I didn't offer help. I didn't ask where they were going. It wasn't my role anymore. One afternoon, I came home to find boxes lined up along the hallway. Not many, just enough to make it clear that this was real, that it was moving forward whether anyone liked it or not. My mother stood near the kitchen holding a dish towel she wasn't using. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way she carried herself. "We didn't think you'd actually go through with it," she said. I set my keys down. "I told you I would." She nodded slowly, like she was still trying to understand something that no longer needed explaining. My father stayed in the living room, watching television without really watching it. The volume was low. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Ethan was in the hallway, on his phone. "I'm telling you, it's just temporary. I just need a place for a few weeks." He stopped when he saw me. There was a brief moment where neither of us spoke. Then he ended the call. He looked at me, frustration still there, but something else mixed in now. Uncertainty. Where are we supposed to go? The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't sarcastic. It was real. I held his gaze. Somewhere else. That was all I said. It wasn't my responsibility to figure out the rest. He let out a breath, running his hair through his hair. The same gesture he had made before, but this time it didn't carry the same confidence. He turned away. Later that evening, I saw him sitting at the edge of the couch, scrolling through his phone, his posture tense, his foot tapping against the floor, waiting for someone to respond, waiting for something to work out. My mother no longer moved through the house like she owned it. She moved carefully now, like she was aware of every step, every sound, every space that wasn't hers anymore. My father stayed quiet. Not distant, not angry, just quiet. The house felt different again, not because it was emptier, but because it was no longer being held together by the same expectations. On the last day, there was no announcement, no final conversation, no attempt to fix what had already been decided. They finished packing in the morning, boxes by the door, coats over their arms. Ethan carried most of it. My mother paused in the kitchen one last time, her hand resting briefly on the counter. My father stood near the door, waiting. No one said anything for a long moment. Then my mother looked at me. "You didn't have to do it this way." I met her eyes. Yes, I did. She nodded once, like she didn't agree, but she understood that it didn't matter anymore. My father opened the door. They walked out. Ethan didn't look back. My mother did, but only for a second. Then the door closed. And just like that, it was quiet. Not tense, not heavy, just quiet. I stood there for a moment, listening. No voices, no movement, no expectations. Just space. Real space. Upstairs, Emma's door was open. She was sitting on her bed, a book in her hands. I walked up slowly, stopping at the doorway. I said, "They left." She looked up. "Oh." There was no shock, no confusion, just acknowledgement. "Okay." I stepped inside. "How do you feel?" She thought about it for a second. "It's quieter." I nodded. "Yeah." She looked back down at her book, then back at me again. "Can we still do something for my birthday?" The question was simple, careful, hopeful, but not expecting too much. I smiled. "Yeah, we can." That afternoon, we went out. Nothing big, just the two of us. We picked up a small cake from a bakery nearby, something Emma chose herself this time. Chocolate with a layer of raspberry filling, decorated neatly, perfectly, in a way I never could have done on my own. We stopped by a store and let her pick out a few things she liked. Not everything, just enough. When we got home, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because everything had. We set the cake on the table, no extra chairs, no loud music, no interruptions, just us. I lit the candles, 8 small flames. Emma sat across from me, her hands resting on the edge of the table. I started singing, softly. "Happy birthday to you." She smiled. Not wide, not exaggerated, just real. She joined in halfway through, her voice quiet but steady. When the song ended, she leaned forward and blew out the candles in one breath. No one clapped, no one added anything. It was enough. I slid the cake toward her. "Go ahead." She picked up the knife, hesitating for a second. Then she cut the first slice, carefully, slowly, like it mattered, because it did. She placed it on a plate and handed it to me, then cut one for herself. We ate in silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt full. "This is better," she said after a moment. I nodded. "Yeah." She looked around the room, then back at me again. "I like it like this." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand lightly. "Me too." She finished her cake without rushing. No one interrupted her, no one took anything from her, no one made her feel like she had to step aside. And when she was done, she didn't get up to clean. She didn't look around to see what needed fixing. She just sat there, content. This time, she didn't have to clean anything. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed downstairs a little longer. The house was still, not empty, not lonely, just peaceful. I leaned back in the chair, letting the quiet settle around me. For the first time, it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had finally been removed. Maybe they think I was cruel. Maybe I was. But if protecting my child makes me the villain, I can live with that. I sat there for a while, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. All the times I had stayed quiet, all the times I had adjusted, all the times I had convinced myself that it wasn't worth it. And then I thought about Emma, about the way she had looked that day, about the way she had spoken that night, about the way she smiled now. And I knew. I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need them to agree. I didn't need them to come back. What would you have done if it was your child? I didn't win. I just stopped losing. They said my son didn't belong to me, that a DNA test could prove he was never really mine to keep. I'm Alara Vance, a mother of two, and the moment my mother-in-law said those words, I realized she wasn't just crossing a line, she was preparing to erase me from my own child's life. Chapter 1. The First Line They Crossed. I used to think the worst thing my mother-in-law could do was criticize how I packed my son's lunch. I was wrong. My name is Alara Vance. I'm 34. I work as a pediatric occupational therapist at Bright Steps Clinic, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Columbus, Ohio. My life isn't glamorous, but it's steady. I spend my days helping children learn how to hold a pencil, how to regulate their emotions, how to function in a world that doesn't always slow down for them. Then I come home to my own two boys, Noah, who just turned 5, and Liam, who's 3 and still insists on falling asleep with one sock on and one sock off for reasons only he understands. My husband Caleb works in real estate. He's kind in the way that makes people trust him instantly, soft-spoken, patient, and almost allergic to confrontation. That used to feel like a strength. Lately, it has started to feel like a gap no one is protecting. His mother, Margaret Hale, fills that gap without asking. She has always had opinions about how I feed the kids, how I dress them, how I speak to them, how often I let Noah watch cartoons. None of it was ever enough to cause a real argument, just enough to make me feel like I was constantly being observed, quietly corrected, reshaped. I told myself it was normal, that every family had a Margaret. The morning everything shifted started like any other Tuesday. I dropped Noah off at Lincoln Elementary just before 8, kissed the top of his head, reminded him to keep his jacket zipped, and watched him run toward the playground without looking back. Liam was still half asleep in the car, his head leaning against the window, his breath fogging a small circle on the glass. By 9, I was at the clinic, reviewing notes from the day before, trying to focus on a child who struggled with sensory processing. I remember thinking how calm everything felt, predictable, safe. Then, my phone rang. It was the school. I almost didn't answer because I was in the middle of a session. Something in me hesitated, just for a second, like my body knew before my mind did. I stepped into the hallway and picked up. They told me Noah had already been picked up. I didn't understand the sentence the first time I heard it. It didn't make sense. I asked them to repeat it, slower, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something logical. He had been signed out early, by his grandmother. My chest tightened so quickly it felt like I couldn't inhale. I asked which grandmother. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it said out loud. Margaret Hale. I don't remember ending the call. I just remember grabbing my keys, telling my supervisor I had an emergency, and walking out of the building with my heart beating so hard it made my vision blur. I called Margaret 3 times on the drive. She didn't answer. I called Caleb. He picked up on the second ring, his voice distracted, probably between showings. I told him what the school said. There was a pause on the line. Not shock, not anger, just a pause. He said maybe she just wanted to spend time with Noah. Maybe she forgot to tell us. I didn't respond. I hung up. By the time I pulled into Margaret's driveway, my hands were shaking. Her house looked exactly the same as it always did. Neatly trimmed lawn, curtains drawn just enough to suggest privacy but not secrecy. Normal. I walked up and didn't bother knocking. The door was unlocked. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring, completely calm. He looked up, surprised, but not scared. That almost made it worse. Margaret was at the counter, slicing apples, like nothing about this was unusual. I asked her why she took him out of school without telling me. She didn't turn around right away. She finished the slice she was holding, placed it carefully on the plate, then looked at me. She said she wanted to spend the afternoon with her grandson. I asked her why she didn't call. She said she didn't think she needed to. The way she said it was what made my stomach drop. Not defensive, not apologetic, just certain. I told him to get his things. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Margaret didn't stop him. She just watched us. That same look again. Not warm, not even particularly hostile, just evaluative. On the drive home, Noah asked why Grandma picked him up early. I told him she wanted to spend time with him. I didn't know how to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. That afternoon, I called Lincoln Elementary back and asked to speak with the principal, Megan Cole. I explained what happened. She listened carefully, asked a few clarifying questions, then pulled up Noah's file. Margaret had added herself as an approved pickup contact the previous week. My heart sank. I asked how that was possible without my consent. Megan explained that the form had been submitted with what appeared to be a valid signature and information. It hadn't raised any immediate red flags. I didn't ask whose signature. I already knew. I told her to remove Margaret immediately, not just from pickup, but from any authorized contact list. No access to records, no communication, nothing. Megan agreed, her tone shifting once she understood the situation more clearly. She assured me they would flag Noah's file and notify all staff. When I hung up, I sat in the car longer than I needed to. Liam was in the back seat, kicking his shoes against the seat, asking if we were home yet. Everything sounded distant. That evening, Caleb came home and tried to smooth things over. He said his mom probably didn't think it was a big deal, that she's from a different generation, that she doesn't always understand boundaries the same way we do. I asked him if he understood them. He didn't answer right away. That silence said more than anything else. Over the next few days, the small things didn't stop. They multiplied. Margaret called to ask what Noah had for lunch, then told me it wasn't balanced enough. She dropped off a set of flashcards and insisted Noah should already be reading at a higher level. She signed him up for a weekend enrichment program without telling me, then acted surprised when I declined. And then there were the comments. Always subtle, always phrased like observations. She mentioned how Noah had certain expressions that reminded her of Victor, how his posture, the way he held his shoulders, felt familiar. She said it casually, like she was reminiscing. I told myself it didn't mean anything. But I started noticing the way she looked at him. It wasn't the way I looked at Liam when he fell asleep on the couch, or the way I watched Noah when he tried something new and hesitated before succeeding. It wasn't soft. It was focused. Assessing. Like she was trying to confirm something. One evening, she came over unannounced again. Noah was building a tower on the living room floor, completely absorbed. She stood there longer than necessary, watching him. I asked if she wanted something. She said she was just noticing how much he was growing. Then she added that some traits skip generations, and sometimes they don't. I asked her what that meant. She smiled slightly, but didn't answer. That night, after the boys were asleep, I stood in the hallway outside Noah's room longer than I needed to. I watched him breathe, one hand curled near his face, completely unaware of anything beyond his dreams. For the first time, I felt something I couldn't name. Not just frustration, not just irritation, something closer to unease, like I had missed the beginning of something important. At that point, I still believed this was about control, about a woman who didn't respect boundaries. I didn't realize she had already crossed them, and she wasn't planning to stop.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. Something was already in motion. I didn't realize how far it had already gone until I started paying attention to the things I used to ignore. It wasn't one big moment. It was a pattern, a series of small, deliberate moves that only made sense once I stopped assuming they were accidental. 2 days after I removed Margaret from Noah's pickup list, Lincoln Elementary called me again. This time, the tone was different, more cautious, more careful with their words. Principal Megan Cole asked if I had authorized anyone else to access Noah's records. I said no. She told me Margaret had shown up that morning and requested to review his academic file. Not pick him up, not speak with a teacher. She specifically asked about his performance, his behavioral notes, his developmental assessments. They refused, of course.
Megan said they cited privacy policy and legal guardianship restrictions. Margaret didn't argue, she didn't raise her voice, she simply nodded, thanked them, and left. But Megan still called me. That's what stayed with me. She didn't call because of what Margaret did, she called because of how she did it. Measured, prepared, like she expected resistance and had already planned around it. After I hung up, I sat at my desk at Bright Steps, staring at the same progress note for almost 10 minutes without typing a single word. One of my colleagues knocked lightly on the door, asking if I was okay. I told her I was just tired. That wasn't a lie. I hadn't slept properly since the day Noah was taken out of school. Every night I would check the locks twice, sometimes 3 times. I started keeping my phone on the nightstand instead of the dresser, just in case the school called again, or Margaret showed up, or something else happened that I couldn't predict. The lack of sleep started to show. By the end of the week, I was called into a brief meeting with HR. Sophie Grant sat across from me, her expression professional but not unfriendly. She asked if everything was all right at home. She mentioned I had missed a couple of minor details in recent reports. Nothing serious, just a pattern worth noting. I told her I was dealing with some family stress. She nodded, said they understood, but reminded me that my role required consistency, the kind of consistency that parents trusted. That word stayed with me long after the meeting ended. Trusted. I built my entire career on that word, and now, somehow, it felt like something I was losing control of. That afternoon, I picked up the boys myself. I didn't tell Caleb I was leaving early. I didn't tell Margaret anything at all. I just When my son told me they left him at a bus stop because he wasn't on the list, I didn't scream, I didn't call them. I started collecting evidence because I'm Elara Vance, and what they didn't know was that every decision they made that day was about to cost them everything. Chapter 1. The Day He Walked Home Alone. I remember the exact second I knew something was wrong, and it wasn't when I saw Ethan walk through the door, it was the silence that came with him. It was late afternoon in July, the kind of warm Seattle day where the light lingers a little too long against the windows, soft and golden, making everything look calmer than it really is. I had just finished putting away some fabric samples from a client project and was rinsing my hands in the kitchen sink when I heard the front door open. I expected the usual rush, the sound of sneakers hitting the floor too hard, the thud of a backpack dropped without care, his voice calling out for me before he even made it past the entryway. That had been our routine every time he came home from somewhere exciting. But that didn't happen. The door opened, then closed. No footsteps running, no voice. Just a quiet, careful movement, like someone trying to not be noticed in their own home. I dried my hands slowly, already feeling something tighten in my chest, and stepped into the hallway. Ethan was standing just inside the door. He still had his backpack on, one strap hanging off his shoulder like he hadn't even noticed it slipping. His hair was a little messy, not from running or playing, but like he had been touching it, pulling at it without realizing. His sneakers were dirty, more than they should have been for a day that was supposed to be spent inside a theme park. He didn't look up right away. That was the first thing. The second was that he wasn't crying. At 8 years old, Ethan was expressive. If he had fun, I knew. If something went wrong, I definitely knew. He didn't hide things from me. Not yet, not at that age. But now, he stood there quiet, almost still, like he was trying to shrink into himself. I forced a small smile, keeping my voice even. "Hey, you're back already." He nodded. I waited for more, for the burst of words I expected, the stories about rides and lines and cotton candy, and whatever small detail had captured his attention. Nothing came. "How was Summer Ridge?" I asked. It was supposed to be a special day. Philip's parents had taken all the kids to Summer Ridge theme park, something they did every couple of years, and Ethan had been talking about it all week. He had picked out his shirt the night before, packed his own little bag with snacks I had probably overthought, and asked me at least 3 times if I was sure everything was set. I had told him it was. "It was good," he said. "Just good." He didn't look at me when he said it. His eyes stayed somewhere near the floor, focused on a spot that didn't exist. I stepped closer. "Did you go on the roller coaster you wanted?" "Yeah." "Did you get lunch there?" "Yeah." "What did you eat?" "I don't remember." The answers came too fast and too flat, like he had already decided how much he was willing to say. I noticed then how tightly he was holding on to the strap of his backpack, his fingers curled around it like it was the only thing keeping him steady. "Ethan," I said softly, "what happened?" He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Nothing. That word again. Nothing. I reached out and gently slid the backpack off his shoulder. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either. It dropped into my hand heavier than I expected. "Your shoes are dirty," I said, keeping my tone neutral. We walked a little. Walked. "From where?" He didn't answer. Something cold moved through me then, slow and deliberate. "Ethan, did Grandpa bring you home?" He shook his head. "Did Uncle Frederick?" Another shake. My voice changed without me meaning it to. "Then how did you get here?" He hesitated. "I took the bus." For a second, I didn't understand the words. They didn't fit together in any way that made sense. "You what?" "I took the bus," he repeated, quieter this time. My heart dropped, not in a sudden crash, but in a slow, sinking way, like something falling through water. "You took the bus? By yourself?" He nodded. I felt the room shift around me, like everything had tilted just slightly off balance. "Where did they drop you off?" That was the moment he finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't fear. It was something worse. It was uncertainty, like he wasn't sure if he had done something wrong. "We didn't go inside," he said. "Didn't go inside where?" "The park." My throat tightened. "Why not?" He swallowed. "Grandma said I didn't have a ticket." I stood very still. "Okay," I said slowly. "Then what happened?" He took a breath, like he was preparing himself, and even then he didn't look at me directly. "I asked if we could call you, so you could get one." That made sense. That was the obvious solution. That was what any adult would have done without thinking twice. And Grandma said it wasn't necessary. Not necessary. Frederick said we were going to be late. "Late for what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer didn't matter. "For the rides." I closed my eyes for a half-second, just to keep my voice from breaking. "Did anyone try to get another ticket?" He shook his head. "Did anyone call me?" Another shake. I felt something shift inside me then, not fully formed, but moving in a direction I didn't like. "Okay," I said, "and then what?" He looked down again, his fingers tightening around nothing now that the backpack was gone. We got back in the car, and we drove away. Away from the park. Yeah. How far? I don't know.
He paused, thinking. Maybe a few minutes. And then he swallowed again, harder this time. They stopped near a bus stop. My chest tightened. What did Grandma say? He took a moment before answering, like he was replaying it in his head, trying to get it exactly right. She said